And I have 30 minutes with questions. Okay. I want to leave a lot of time for questions because the value of these type of events is not someone coming in and talking to you for 29 minutes, because most of you won't remember what I said. And that's just the reality, that's okay. But questions are good, and question what we're doing. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about where the Department of Defense is going in acquisition and sustainment. And I say that for a very particular reason. We manage in the department 87 major defense acquisition programs. That's just one slice of what we do. 87 programs with a total program value of $1.9 trillion. That's a lot of money. That's life cycle. But when we talk about acquisition, we can't forget about the sustainment piece, because roughly 80% of all program costs are borne in sustainment. So we have to think about that. I very much appreciated the comments from Emily and GSA. The relationship is great. We use GSA for buying things that are available predominantly on the commercial market, and there's a lot of those. But we have to remember, in defense, we have to have excess capability. So how do we blend the commercial market with excess capability? But I'm going to step back. How many of you are taxpayers? So we got 5 people in the back here who didn't raise their hands. We have some IRS folks outside. So if you're a taxpayer, you need and you should care about what we're trying to do in the department. We're trying to go much faster. We're trying to use new ways of buying programs to drive down overall program cost. And we're trying to enhance sustainment. Now, we've had a lot of help. We had a congressionally mandated study from Section 809 of, Charlie, help me out, the FY17 NDA, National Defense Authorization Act?
16.
16, thank you. So Charlie Williams was one of the co-conspirators on the 809 report. It's actually an incredibly powerful and good report. It goes through and lays out a broad number of initiatives that we can use to shorten the acquisition cycle time and to enhance sustainability. We've also had a lot of help from the Hill. Over the last 3 years, we've had over 120 different statutory changes to defense acquisition. That's a lot of things to keep track of. So I'm going to try to highlight a couple of the more important ones. And then I'm going to come back around to why it matters. One, we're having expanded use of a program called Other Transactions Authorities. Are all of you familiar with OTAs? Is anybody familiar with OTAs? Good. Do you like them? I like them when they're used for what they're intended for. I don't want to go out and buy a Joint Strike Fighter with another transaction authority. There are times you need set hard requirements. There are times you need to go fast and get to a prototype. Other transaction authorities are great in that let's do something for 6 months to 4 years time frame to develop a prototype so then you can go into acquisition. We also have what's referred to as the middle tier of acquisition, Section 804 of, I think, NDAA 17, they all blend together, and frankly, it doesn't matter. But Section 804 allows us to go into an acquisition, limited acquisition, of a system that has to be delivered within a 5-year time period without a set formal validated requirements process ahead of it. Now, requirements add time and they add complexity. If we know what we want in a short spurt for 4 to 5 years, using the middle tier of acquisition, Section 804 authorities works very well. And we have on the order of 15 to 20 middle tier of acquisition programs in the pipeline. I was sitting in a meeting yesterday where we were talking about an integrated immersive visual technology for training troops. Works great. Commercial application, you make some, you do some software apps, and you can field something that matters. But we're not done yet. So one of the things that we have to look at from a federal government standpoint is how do we think about acquisition of software? Any of you worry about acquisition of software? I'm not talking about going out and buying Windows 10 or Windows 11. I'm talking about going out and developing a capability. That's hard. And it's very hard when you have the current budgetary process where you have to line things up. So we have to work with the Hill to figure out how do we develop software with the money we have in methods that go all the way from development to testing to fielding to sustainment, all in the same spiral. And instead of doing the big waterfall drops of software that we've always grown accustomed to in the Department of Defense and across federal government, we have to drive agility into software. So why is this important? I'm going to bring you back around to my world. It's important because our job in acquisition and sustainment is to field the very best possible capability for the young men and women we send into very dangerous places. And that should matter. If anybody here has a son, a daughter, a nephew, a niece, a neighbor across the street who we've sent into some dangerous places, what we do matters. Because what our job is to field capability to bring people back alive. I know that sounds maudlin, but that's really how I measure my job. And that means we have to think about the entire life cycle process. And as we've evolved with that mission space, we're going from an era of counterinsurgency, Afghanistan, Iraq's kind of over, but into an era of great power competition as laid out in the National Defense Strategy that Secretary Mattis put out last year. There are 3 lines of effort that guide what the department does. The first is enhance the lethality of the things that we are fielding. We want to be more lethal for the same amount of money. The second is build partnerships and alliances around the world. We have to recognize that we don't do everything here in America. There are great pockets of technology and capabilities that we can acquire from other parts of the world. And then the third is reform the way we do business. And that's really what you're talking about here today. How do we think about going to different types of service contracts? How do we buy things more rapidly and more quickly? But at the end of the day, it's really all about, and I don't like the word innovate, because everybody says innovate, but no one knows what it means. Anybody think you know what innovation means? I love it. We have a room here who's talking about innovation and no one raised their hand. It's a good thing, because I was going to ask you. What innovation means to me is taking a look at how do you solve a problem that is right in front of you that you don't have a solution for. Okay? It's not let's go out and get some new whiz-bang technology. It's what problem do we have? So what problem do we have laid out in the National Defense Strategy? It's the problem of near-peer competitors. And in January of this year, I'm going to sound like an old Cold Warrior. I apologize for that. I don't want to sound like that. But Defense Intelligence Agency laid out an unclassified document that talked about China's growth of military capability. Do we care? We probably should, at least until China accepts internationally accepted norms for things like protection of intellectual property, freedom of navigation through the Pacific region, et cetera, et cetera. But the growth in Chinese capabilities has been eye-watering. Over the last roughly a decade to 15 years, They have gone from being a very minor military player to a major military player with over 300 ships. China was the second nation to field fifth-generation fighter aircraft. They have an extensive missile system to prevent freedom of operation through the South China Sea. And they actively use cyber capabilities to borrow other people's intellectual property. Notice the way I said that. And when I think about the future, and this becomes very important for what we're buying, I have to think about more than just conventional capabilities. We have to field exquisite conventional capabilities. But we also have to pay attention to those capabilities that come from non-conventional weapon systems. And one of the primary places for that is in comms, communications, and the cyberspace. Okay? We know for a fact that China uses cyberspace effectively to mine information. We know that companies like Huawei, you can take what their executives say on face value or not. We know that companies like Huawei are tied into Chinese intelligence services. We know Huawei is moving ahead very quickly in 5G. Is anybody in the room concerned about a Huawei-based infrastructure in 5G in, Europe, the United States, Canada? No one's worried about it? I am. I am, because anything that goes out over a 5G network with the right software embeds can be sent back to whomever the owner of that particular equipment is. And I'm not saying that there are backdoors in Huawei's 5G-enabled networks, but since it's a software-enabled network, and since we know how certain nations operate, we need to think very seriously about what we're buying and what our friends and allies are buying. There was a piece on CNN this morning that the U.S. Basically is issuing a fairly stern ultimatum to Germany. If you go with Huawei for your 5G network, we will not share intelligence with you. There's probably a pretty good reason for that. So we have to think about that as we move forward. And embedded in that, in acquisition, is we're going to be putting on some policies that allow us to think about cybersecurity and the things that we buy. And we have to do that from our office in the Secretary of Defense, because each of our services is going out with cyber policies. How are we going to protect information in our defense acquisition base, in our defense industrial base, in the second and third tier suppliers? How are we going to protect information? And how can we do it most efficiently? We think that would come best with one set of standards, not a set of standards that are Army, not a set that are Navy, not a set that are Air Force. As industry out there, recognize you're going to have to do some things in cyber protection. We're trying to do things to allow you to do it the same with all services. And I think that's a fair ask. So, with that kind of as a context, I want to give you just my boss's priorities. Ellen Lord, she's the number 4 or 5 person in the Pentagon. Give you her priorities for acquisition for this particular year. And I should have them memorized, but I don't. It's a limitation in brain cells. But the first is to drive F35 cost in. And that's for both procurement and sustainment and cost of developing software. Okay, so again, instead of going to these big monolithic drops of software every 6 months, we are developing a build, test, repair, build, test, repair cycle in very short cycle times. We believe that that will drive the cost down. we, the department, want to do more of that type of software development writ large. Second priority, modernize the nuclear deterrent. Right now, the nation spends about 2.7% of the defense budget on nuclear sustainment. But right now, we're modernizing the bomber force, the next generation submarine force, and the land-based missile force. By 2029, roughly just shy of 7% of the defense budget will be involved in nuclear modernization and sustainment. Folks, that's a lot of money. And we've got to get that right. Embedded in that, especially important for this audience, is one of the big flags and pillars of modernization of the nuclear deterrent. It's modernization of nuclear command and control. And that's a hard problem. You know, I wish I could say, geez, we're going to go out and get a Samsung phone or an iPhone. That's not nuclear command and control. Nuclear command and control has to work reliably in a very heavily jammed environment at all times and in all types of radiation background. A hard problem. It's so hard we haven't done much with it for multiple years. And I remember watching a 60 Minutes piece about 3-4 years ago where some of our nuclear command and control was still being done using 5.25-inch floppy disks. Folks, that's not where we need to be. It doesn't matter where you come down on the use of nuclear weapons part of the spectrum. First and foremost, we have got to be secure in our command and control. And that starts with communications. That is a must-do for America as long as we're going to have any type of nuclear deterrent. So I'm not getting into any argument about right or wrong on nuclear deterrence, but if you're going to do it, you got to do it right. And that starts with command and control. The third priority, and this is still for the build a more lethal force, provide real-time response to our combatant commanders. We want to field what the combatant commanders ask for in a period of 6 to 12 months. That's field a leave-behind capability. And we've done that for things like base protection out forward with sensors. We've done that for small comm networks. But we can and need to do better with fielding things very, very quickly. And that crosses all types of continuums and breaks down the boundaries between science and technology, research and development, and procurement. We've got to stop thinking in terms of silos when we think about acquisition. And we've got to figure out how do we move most quickly through a process without overburdening ourselves with requirements and making testing part of the build. Fourth thing, improve supply chain operations. Now I know most of the people in here are mostly communications, software, information technology folks. Are you comfortable with our supply chain right now? Are you not comfortable? Are you awake? Are you asleep? Oh, we have someone. Hi to you too. Are you comfortable or not comfortable? I'm not comfortable because we have awful fragilities, single source or at most two source in many of the underlying technologies we need. Many of the microcircuits we need, the microchips. We either have to source them offshore, which may be okay, or we have to go to a very limited supplier base. But if you buy your chip offshore, how do you know what's inside it? And that becomes problematic for the Defense Department. If I'm taking my iPhone and someone wants to mess around with it with a software bug, fine, I don't get to talk to my wife. She might like that day. If I am operating a high-end weapon system and a software bug hits it and I lose control, that becomes more than an inconvenience. We have to know the pedigree and the surety of the underlying technology we put into our best systems. That's an important part of acquisition in the Department of Defense. And we're looking to industry to help us understand where the supply chains are weak, and I'll talk about that in just a little bit, and offer solutions for how do we get a more trusted and assured source of microcircuits, microelectronics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Following up with that, her sixth priority is implement Executive Order 13806. Has anybody heard of 13806? Okay. I recommend you go to the web and download it. The actual name of this is Assessing and Strengthening the Manufacturing and Industrial Base of America. President Trump signed out the executive order directing the department to lead a review of supply chain fragility. That report has both an unclassified and a classified part. But if you look at the unclassified part, we have roughly 100 manufacturing-based segments where we have either sole source or only two sources of things that we rely on for national security. That's pretty sobering. And we have now gotten money in our budget, and we're hopeful if the budget is released soon that we'll have a request for additional funds to start to work with industry to shore up the industrial base. We are putting money into things like Defense Production Act, Title III, the Industrial Business Fund, to start to prop up industry in those critical areas. That's a big deal, folks. Strengthening alliances. Her first priority is to expand our interaction with the United Kingdom. It's one of the few places we've called out a specific ally for collaboration with chemical and biological defense. And the reason being the UK has an exquisite capability in chemical biological defense. But it's also expand our collaboration with emerging partners. So Lieutenant General Charles Hooper, who's our Director of Defense Security Cooperation Agency, has been going to countries like Vietnam, Thailand. Next week I think he's going to Croatia and Macedonia, looking for other potential industrial partners. I think that's a good thing. I think America playing with others is a very powerful thing in national security. So let me get to the last couple, and then we'll open it up to questions. For our line of effort 3 reform, I've talked about most of those. Ms. Lord's, and I'm my boss, first priority, execute 2016 to 2019 National Defense Authorization Act acquisition reforms. All 100 plus of them. We're prioritizing. First and foremost are those parts of the Authorization Act that gives us more agility to field capability quicker. We would much rather field something at 80 or 90% of total capability now rather than wait 5 years to field the perfect solution. The young men and women we send into dangerous places are marvelous. They figure out how to use stuff. We just got to get it in their hands so they can protect themselves. Second thing, enhanced DoD acquisition workforce talent management. This is an ongoing problem. I look out here. It's getting increasingly difficult to compete with some of the restrictions we have for talent in the engineering, information technologies, computer science areas. We're trying some novel approaches, some new approaches with Congress, direct hire authority, enhanced pay authority, those types of things. But at the end of the day, if we have a hard time getting in as much top talent as we want, we're going to be coming to industry to outsource and get some of that, and get availability of that top talent anywhere we can. And then finally, refine our internal business processes. So that's kind of it's a little bit longer than I wanted to go, but that's at a high level what we're doing in the Department of Defense. And with that, I'd like to open it up to questions, because that's the important part. And I have a question back in the corner, guy in the blue shirt. I hope that's blue. As you get older, you don't see as well.
From today, Brett Marley, U.S. Digital Service. Been really encouraged by the rapid software development as a result of Kessel Run in Air Force, and just wondering how the expansion and lessons learned are taking place as Air Force has stood up PEO Digital, and there's even word. Just want to hear what's going well, what's hard.
Can you just repeat the last part? It became a little bit echoey.
Yeah, under PEO Digital.
Right.
What is going well and what's really hard?
Too early to tell. So we're encouraged by the Air Force's experiment. The Kessel Run guys are pretty cool. They're doing some really nice software development. I don't know how that scales. I do know the most important part of Kessel Run is not the lock on the door, but the people inside. And I don't know how the Kessel Run experiment scales. We're going to be trying to replicate that in other places. We do need things like PEO Digital. So I have one briefing where I say one of the real battles of the future is going to be the battle for digital supremacy. I wish I had come up with that. I stole it from The Economist about 6 months ago. But it was a marvelous piece in The Economist talking about digital supremacy. If we make the leap from just IT to digital, there are some skills that we need. And how's it going from your perspective? How does it scale? You asked me a question, I'll ask you a question. You obviously know a lot about it, so.
Let's see, from my perspective over at U.S. Digital Service, we've got teams in a few agencies, and we're delivering things quickly. It's hard to scale. And so for that reason, we've developed a training program for IT contracting officers, which we're scaling. It's not required in DoD yet, but we're also looking at training programs to change things from the way that we're treating IT as projects to digital products. And yeah, there's plenty of work to be done, but it is very hard to scale.
The scaling is hard. Now, you just triggered something, and if Captain DeAndrea over here will raise her hand, if you would be able to just send her an email of some of your thoughts, I would like to bring them in. But you mentioned training, and reform of acquisition training is a large part of what we're trying to do. So within the department, we had this wonderful thing called Defense Acquisition University that taught people the way I learned when I was an undergraduate. I won't tell you what years those were. But I will say the lady who was before me talked about Stand By Me. That was not an 80s song, that was a 60s song. So we're trying to take these big monolithic 6-week to 3-month courses at Defense Acquisition University and go to 1 to 2 day training modules in things like application of digital data to program management, application of artificial intelligence, contracting for IT, new contracting methods. Eleanor calls it creative compliance. So I would like your ideas on the types of things that we need to think about training to start to build a cadre to expand the Kessel Run experiment. And for those of you who don't know what Kessel Run is, go to Boston, go in and see these bunch of young civilians and military folks who have weird Star Wars stuff up all over the walls, but they're turning out software in a matter of hours.
Good morning, sir. My name is Emma Renton. I'm a moderator here today, and I'm the owner of the Acquisition Innovation Hub. Just wanted to say parenthetically that if you want to find out about Kessel Run, attend the IT modernization session today, because they're here. And secondly,
is there a Kessel Run guy in the audience?
May not be here yet.
Okay, I was just going to have them introduce themselves, but okay, go.
Okay. I think it was probably during the shutdown, but there was an interview done with your boss, Eleanor, in which she said she wants to streamline 5002, DoD 5002, perhaps down to a 2-page outline. Can you tell us what the plan is for that and how that would happen?
Sure. And we're realizing 2 pages may be hard, but 3 pages may not be. So what we have to start with, you start with only including things that are statutory, and then you cut out all the rest of this stuff. Okay? And we think we can get it down to 3 to 5 pages of must do, maybe with some appendices for best practices. But the way you do it is you don't take the existing 5,000 and write over it. You take a clean piece of paper and start from new and say, start with what are the questions? What do you want to do? How are you going to do it? How are you going to measure it? And what's the output? And at the end of the day, that's what we have to do. So we have to stop thinking, we used to have this beautiful poster that was put together by DAU, the System Engineering Cycle of the Department of Defense. And it was exquisite, and anybody who could explain that chart would get a PhD in systems engineering. But that's not the way you buy things in the real world. So we have to blow up a lot of that thinking and go back and say, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? And how does it help deliver capability? And that's the mindset. So Assistant Secretary Kevin Fahey has the task. He's got a team. He's got, what month is it now? March? He's got 8 more months to deliver. If you have ideas of things that are not value added, let us know. So we want to just maintain the critical path. And I know that's kind of a waffly answer, but we're in Washington now, so at least I said the same words.
Thank you for your comments. One quick item, the IRS, Stephen Brandon, the IRS Office of Policy, reduced procurement documentation by 84%. So it's something that's certainly pursuable and achievable item. If I could take us back to the software concept, you talked about coding of actual software.
Mm-hmm.
And could you talk a little about the juxtaposition, the distinction between custom software and using COTS when and where possible, especially pertinent to cybersecurity issues?
So I don't know if everybody heard it because it sounded like it was projecting forward. So the question was, how do we think about the juxtaposition of COTS software and custom-built software? So I would say use COTS software for standard administrative practices. Use COTS software for managing data flow through a system. You don't use COTS software for automatic target recognition using specific sensors that provide capability. So the trick here is, and this comes back to an architectural question, how do we truly instantiate open systems in the things we're buying? So for those things that are not necessarily on a critical combat capability path, but more an administrative path, use COTS. But then we've got to be able to merge that through open systems architectures, which people have been talking about for 20 years. But if we truly do get an open system set of standards, where we, the government, are willing to pay a little bit more for the interface standards, I'm fine with it. So we've got to be willing to pay a little bit more for true openness. Then you can put in the applications that give combat capability. But it's a very complex dynamic. What we haven't been willing to do in the past is pay for the interface standards. And if you pay for the interface standards, you don't need the industrial IP. You just need to know how what you're building will interface with that. And I think we're starting to get some maturity. Dana Deasy, the CIO of the Department of Defense, is thinking in that coordinate space. It's going to take some retraining of our people. But at the end of the day, we have to stop thinking that we, the department, are going to get something for nothing. We've got to pay for where there's value. He's getting ready to rush me out. Is there one more question? Is there one more non-taxpayer out there? on some of our systems. Folks, thank you. I hope it's been helpful. I wish you luck in what you're trying to do, because what you're trying to do is transform or reform. I love these buzzwords, but change the system from the inside. It is absolutely critical that we work on this together, because if we don't change, we're going to waste a lot of people's money, and we don't have enough money to waste. So thanks.
I hope you guys are noticing some of the connections that are forming between our program today and what we've heard in our keynotes, because they're great connections. Some of the people and projects and programs that were called out this morning by Emily and Mr. Shaffer are in the program today. Here from those people. So we're pretty far behind here, so I'm not sure what we're going to do to shorten this up. But,
Don't apologize for making interesting comments and getting good questions. It's a good problem to have.
So I think rather than actually kind of read you guys through the agenda for the day, which was the next thing that is on the script, so to speak, I'll let you read that for yourself. Your problem is going to be deciding what to go to. There are far too many choices here, and they're really good choices in our opinion. So